Today I interviewed Eva Moon, a resilient individual who talks about her discovery and journey as a carrier of a rare genetic mutation called BRCA1, or breast cancer gene 1.
The rate of this mutation among Eastern European Jews is a lot higher.
This rare mutation gives an 87% chance of breast cancer and 55% chance of ovarian cancer, along with increased risks of other kinds of cancers. After tragically losing her mother to cancer, Eva faced the daunting reality of her own genetic predisposition to the disease.
The surgeons wanted me to have preventive surgeries immediately. In fact, I had a total hysterectomy within 3 weeks of finding out my genetic status.
Join us as we listen to her raw unraveling of experiences and how she coped in tough times. While life sometimes may feel isolating, just remember that there is always a place to turn to for support, be it with friends, family, a therapist, or support groups. We, the Multispective team, work hard every day to build a community of care and provide inspiration, relief, and methods to cope and manage through difficult days. But we wouldn't be anywhere without all of you listeners, so a big thank you to you. Please support us by subscribing and spread the word to friends and family or anyone you know that may be struggling and you think could use some extra support. So, Eva, can you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself? Where are you from? Where do you live?
I live in Redmond, Washington, which is near Seattle.
Okay.
I've always been sort of a West Coast U.S. girl, although I did a stint of 7 or 8 years in Atlanta, but came back to the West Coast. I've been a musician and performer for most of my life. I'm married 2 adult children, one of them getting married soon, next month.
Wow, congratulations.
Thank you. At last. And I'm, not sure when you want to get into the subject of the podcast. But I'm really happy to talk to you today about anything you want to talk about.
Yeah, for sure. We'll definitely get to the story. But I like my listeners to hear a little bit of like background context about, sort of like childhood and relationship with family. So can you tell me like what was your relationship like with your mom, your dad, your parents? Do you have a good sort of family relationship?
Yeah, no, I had one of those idyllic, happy family childhoods in Southern California. I was born in Los Angeles and grew up there. I have 2 sisters who are younger than me, and we are very close. We have a chat window that's open all day, every day, and we chit chat with each other and do Wordle every morning.
Yeah.
My mother passed away some years ago, and we'll get into that because that's related to my story. And my father is in assisted living now with dementia. So that's a challenge. But I've had a really good life, and I've been married. Well, we're coming up to 42 years.
Wow,
married. So I think it's going to work out.
No end in sight at this point.
Yeah, he's stuck with me.
I love it. Oh, amazing! That's so great. Do you feel like your parents emulated a really good marital relationship that sort of like you carried forward into yours?
I think that was, one of the real blessings of my childhood. My sisters and I all agree that they modeled a relationship where they were there for each other first and us second. And I never felt none of us ever felt neglected by that. We felt that they were, I think pretty deliberate about it, that they wanted to model for us how 2 people should be in love.
That's amazing.
And my sisters and I have all been married for a long time, and none of us has ever been divorced. So I guess it took.
Wow. I wonder whether like A part of it was just also like for you, it was just like a natural thing. Like that's just what you saw growing up. And so it just sort of like, that's what you attracted into your own life. And so that's what you also created in your own family life. Or were there moments that you felt you had to be very intentional in terms of maintaining that sort of team spirit, like you and I are a team kind of spirit?
Um, I think there was some intention in pursuing activities. My husband is also a musician, as a not as a main career, but we've always created music together. We've been in bands together, and I was conscious of modeling a similar thing for my own children. That I knew so many people when my children were growing up who focused all of their energy on their children. And we certainly focused a lot of energy on our children, but we always made sure that we had things that were just for each other. And when I I had so many friends who, when their kids left for college, they didn't know each other anymore as a couple. And I know a lot of marriages who broke up after the kids left home because they hadn't maintained a relationship that was just themselves. There was just nothing left
Yeah.
after the kids were gone. So
Wow.
I was conscious, especially as our kids were getting older and getting ready to go to college and leave home, that we had managed to have our own things that didn't involve them, and I think that set us up for a longer term success as a couple.
That's amazing. I feel like this is something listeners need to hear, not only listeners, but anyone and everyone, like, trying to balance a relationship, and especially when kids come into the picture, because, everyone's got differing sort of ideas as to like how to raise kids and like how much time to spend with kids, yet balance their work life and their social life and everything else. That it's very easy to sort of like, again, because your default place is home where your partner is, it's easy to just sort of like pay less attention to that. Like we prioritize things differently when we go through these different phases. But like the fact that the both of you kind of like maintained that sense of like, togetherness, having activities together, and that's really awesome. Like, that's amazing. Yeah.
And I don't think it harmed my kids, and it didn't harm my sisters and me to know that we weren't the center of the world.
Yeah. True.
So, I consciously or unconsciously modeled the same thing that my parents had modeled for me, that they were important. If they needed me, I was there. But my primary relationship was with my husband.
Wow.
And I was always going to maintain things that didn't include them.
Right. Did you?
And I think that's healthy.
Yeah, definitely. Did you feel like that was like reciprocated by your husband in a very natural sense, or was that something that you had to kind of like, not necessarily like teach him, but put into practice enough for it to become a norm in your household?
I don't remember like deliberately trying to make it one thing or another. We
Yeah.
just had we had met through music and dance, and we naturally continued that. And it wasn't like a plan. I said, "Oh, I'm going to do these things to
Yeah.
maintain my relationship with my husband." These are just things that we did, and we continued to do them.
Yeah.
And it just incorporated having kids into a life that we already had.
That's awesome. Yeah. Can you tell me a little bit about when did things start to kind of like turn around for you when you first realized that you had, BRCA, and tell us a little bit about that.
Okay, BRCA. We'll get right into that. Um, I had never heard of it. I didn't know anything about it. I have a vague memory of reading some article at some point years ago about women with high risk of breast cancer who had preventive mastectomies, and I thought it was crazy
Yeah.
to do that. But then my mother got cancer and recovered from that and then got cancer again. And because of our family history, BRCA, for your listeners who may not know, BRCA1 and BRCA2 are genetic mutations that give, well, BRCA1 is the more extreme one of the two. And it gives, if you have the mutation, you have an 87% chance of breast cancer and a 55% chance of ovarian cancer. And the most deadly kinds of those cancers, breast cancer, most of the BRCA1 breast cancers are what they call triple negative, which means that they don't respond to any hormone therapies. And they spread very quickly. My mother, because of our family history, my mother and her mother died of ovarian cancer, and we had other cancer in the family, and also we're Eastern European Jews, and the BRCA1 is particularly high in that population. Oh. They finally tested her, and she tested positive for BRCA1. And that meant that my sisters and I each had a 50-50 chance of also being positive. So we immediately all got tested. And thankfully, my sisters tested negative. They got that side of the coin. And I got the other side of the coin. I tested positive. And of the three of us, I was probably the best one to test positive because I love attention. I got a lot of it.
That's one way to look at it.
But my mother was sick at the time, and I was thrown into absolute chaos. The surgeons wanted me to have preventive surgeries immediately. In fact, I had a total hysterectomy within 3 weeks of finding out my genetic status.
How many years ago was this? Like, how old were you?
I was in my 50s at this point. I was, getting to the age where I should have had cancer already. I was very lucky not to have already had cancer. So I had a preventive hysterectomy and was immediately thrown into, doing research about, what should I do about my breasts? And and at the time, I was performing a lot as a singer. I was in a band with my husband, and also I was doing my own original material. And I was sort of I had this cabaret singer persona where, I was wearing sexy clothes and, hanging over pianos and the thought of, giving up all these female parts just really threw me for a loop. I didn't know who I was. I didn't want to be a mastectomy girl for the rest of my life. I didn't. Was I still a woman without all these parts? I really identified with myself as a woman, as with my body. I loved my breasts.
Yeah,
and I didn't want to lose them, but I felt like, they were booby trapped at this point. They was like ticking bombs waiting to go off. And so there was a sense of urgency around that because I was already old enough that I should have gotten cancer already. And so I started immediately looking at options for surgery and reconstruction. Right. And at the time, not many people knew. This was about a year before Angelina Jolie came out as also having BRCA1 mutation. So and she made a lot more people aware when she had her mastectomies. So people didn't really understand, and I tried to explain, and they said, "Well, there's still a 13% chance you won't get cancer." Well, would you fly on an airline that had a 13% rate of not crashing?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So I didn't have doubts about wanting to have the preventive surgery because the odds of cancer were so very high.
Mm.
Um, but that didn't make it easy because I didn't have cancer, and I was amputating healthy body parts,
Yeah. And
and without ever knowing
yeah.
if I would have, or I had to
Mm-hmm.
do it on just based on statistics
Mm-hmm.
rather than any diagnosis.
Right.
So that was it was an emotional time. Let's just say that.
Yeah.
um,
And your mom had been diagnosed with cancer at around what age? And same with your grandma. Like, did they have it earlier in their own lives?
my mother did pretty well. She was in her 60s, no 70s. She was in her 70s, but my grandmother died when she was 52,
Right.
and so
Uh,
I've known women in their 30s who
Who've
with the mutation who have had cancer.
hmm,
Um, it you just never know. And
right.
and I will never know because it's possible I never would have gotten cancer and I never would have had to go through any of this, but I didn't
Mm-hmm.
know. And
Right.
I had to go just on what people were telling me and what my own research was telling me about the risks.
Mm-hmm. What got the doctors to test your mom for this particular mutation?
Well, her getting cancer twice,
Mm-hmm.
and she had uterine and ovarian. It was that area, not the breasts. And her mother having ovarian cancer, and being Eastern European Jews. The rate of this mutation among Eastern European Jews is a lot higher.
That's so interesting, though. Like, I wonder what have you read about it before? Like, what is it that's why is this mutation so common among them?
Mostly because it's a community of people that didn't marry outside their community very much. So there's they've tried to trace it back. I think they say they traced this mutation back to four sisters, hundreds of years ago, and because the community is so insular and
Mm,
doesn't marry outside the community,
it just
basically
stays.
all Eastern European Jews are fourth cousins.
All right, fair enough.
So things tend to get passed down more easily when there's not a lot of mixing with other communities.
Hmm.
So that's probably the primary reason.
Interesting. Do you feel is there any other sort of treatment, preventative treatment that could be done for someone that's likely? Is there any sort of like DNA related treatment or something that could be done to like change that for an individual who doesn't have it but you know has a chance of having it?
There's no treatment that can prevent a genetic cancer. Now, most breast cancers are not, like 90% of breast cancers are not genetically triggered. Um, but if you've got a genetic mutation, um, there's not a lot you can do about that. You can do intensive monitoring
Hmm.
and just try and catch it early. And some people choose to do that, especially younger women who may, still want to have children and nurse them.
Fair enough. Yeah.
They did, but I couldn't take the level of monitoring that would be required, uh, mammograms and
Hmm.
ultrasounds and MRIs, every 3 months, and it
Yeah.
just and also with the triple negative cancer, it can metastasize when it's too small to be picked up in a mammogram.
Right. Oh,
So
yeah.
it's the chance of missing it. I couldn't live with that hanging over my head. I would rather just take care
Hmm.
of it myself. But I had already had my children. I was older.
Yeah.
I still liked my breasts. I didn't want to lose them, but like I said, they were, ticking time bombs,
Yeah, true.
these
Yeah.
booby traps that I just wanted, to not have to be worrying about if they were going to go off or not.
Yeah, no, of
And
course.
ovarian cancer, people talk mostly about the breast cancer because the chances are so high, but 55% chance of ovarian cancer. Ovarian cancer is one of the deadliest kinds. It's very difficult to catch early. And the symptoms of early ovarian cancer are so similar to other conditions and so vague that it's very rarely caught early.
Hmm.
So off they went.
Wow.
Um,
Can you walk me through that moment after the mastectomy and hysterectomy? What was going through your mind when you first looked at yourself? How did you feel?
well, the hysterectomy, that wasn't.
Can't really. Yeah.
There was a laparoscope. I had like 5 Band-Aids. It
Yeah,
was,
yeah, yeah.
the mastectomy. It was interesting. I did a lot of research on reconstruction, and I found a hospital in New Orleans that just focuses on reconstructive breast surgery. It's all they do. They do thousands and thousands of them every year, and they were doing reconstruction techniques that no one, even in Seattle, which has a pretty good medical community, was doing. They were doing reconstruction using tissue from other parts of the body, and a lot. I think it's a lot more common now. Even in Seattle, I could get reconstruction using belly fat to make new
Oh,
breasts.
right.
But at the time, I didn't have enough. And it was the only time in my life I haven't been fat enough for something. But there was this hospital in New Orleans where they were using butt fat, basically.
Oh,
They
interesting.
took well, not just the fat, but they took the tissue with the blood vessels and everything, and created new breasts out of my butt. I mean, I could flash you and moon you at the same time now.
You hilarious. I love that you're able to
Um,
laugh about it.
and they did
You
it all in one surgery. They did the mastectomy and the basic reconstruction in one 13-hour day.
Oh
And I slept
wow.
through the whole thing. So my husband was the one who was pacing the waiting room for 13 hours
Yeah.
waiting to find out what happened.
That's so
And
cool.
when I woke up, of course, everything was bandaged, but I saw them pretty soon. They made me get up and take a shower and stuff. And they looked all right. They looked like breasts. It was, of course, right after surgery. There's all things are swollen,
Scars.
and
Yeah.
they look like they've been through the war. And also, there was a second surgery 3 months later where they sort of refined everything and made them prettier.
Right.
But I kept my own skin on the breasts, including the skin of the nipples. So
Oh, okay.
they actually look great.
Oh, amazing.
But they're numb. The nerves go through the breast tissue, not along the skin. So I lost
Sensation.
pretty much all sensation, and
Right.
they were. To give you, I mean, it's weird having these numb breasts on my chest. I remember one time when a while after I'd had the surgery, I was washing my car, and at one point, I suddenly I couldn't move like towards the windshield to wipe it off, and I for a second I didn't know why, and then I realized that my the windshield wiper blade had caught on one of my breasts and was keeping me from moving forward, and I didn't
No
know it.
way.
So
That's
that's how numb
crazy,
they were.
right? But is there nothing that they could like nerve endings they couldn't put? I don't know how this works. I'm not a
Nerves.
scientist. Yeah.
This was years ago. I don't know if there's better therapies for that now. I have heard that some women retain some level of sensation. That was difficult because, you know, it was always important, the sensation, and a big part of the pleasure for
Yeah.
me. And I agree. I grieve for that loss. But you move on.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So I don't think you can like transplant nerves or once they're cut, but I don't know what the current level of treatment is around that, and if they've worked out ways. Everything you leave, including the nipple skin, is a level of increased risk because you can't get
Right.
if you try to leave a nerve that's going through the breast tissue, you're necessarily going to leave some breast tissue behind. And
Right.
every cell of breast tissue that's left behind is a risk of cancer. So keeping my nipples probably reduced the effectiveness of the mastectomy a small amount.
Right.
But I felt that it was, for me at the time, emotionally, it was worth a slight increased risk to keep them.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
fair enough. Um, can you tell me a little bit about, like, I had a question in mind. I think I just like slipped because. What about in terms of like that change for you, sort of like mentally and emotionally, like accepting that this part of your body may look the same, but deep down inside it's kind of like not like.
Yeah.
Was that sort of like overridden by the fact that, okay, like at least rest assured, like I don't ever have to worry about this becoming an issue or a bigger thing? Or were there like moments where you were, really just like sad about like the loss of this huge chunk of your body being taken away from you?
It's a big deal to lose a part of your body, and the hardest parts were the time, the weeks leading up to it, when I had to accept that this was going to happen. And I did a number of things to
Like cope, I
to
suppose.
cope. I had been performing and I'd been writing music, and when my mom was sick, and then I found out I had this, I stopped all of that. I couldn't bring myself to get up on a stage. I couldn't bring myself to, write another song, or, I didn't want, what was I going to write about? I'd been writing all these songs about, romance and sex, and, and all of a sudden I felt like a medical specimen rather than a woman. And I thought I would never write again. But then my husband I was having a hard time making him understand what it meant, how I felt about losing these body parts, and how it affected me. And I wrote a song about that. And it wasn't my usual sort of song. It was called "Where Are You Now, My Dancing Girl?" And and it's a very sad song. But I just sort of put all my feelings about losing myself, the sense of myself as a dancing girl, that happy person was going to be gone. And I played it for him. And that's when he finally understood, he understood, and it was a big change at that moment.
Do you feel like you, not necessarily like you express yourself better, but do you feel like art, using music or any form of art, it helps an individual express themselves or release some of the pain that they experience better than, I don't know, say therapy session or like just, talking about it?
I've talked to a lot of women about this. I've done, presentations at oncology conferences, and talked to, women who've been going. And I wrote a show ultimately about all of this. So I've talked to a lot of women about it. And I think any creative pursuit is a way of dealing with personal trauma. that, I've talked to women who've taken up ceramics or, stained glass or painting or writing or singing or ukulele or, they've
Mm.
taken up some kind of creative pursuit. Because when you're in that moment of creating something, it takes you out of your head, this part of your head where you're horribleizing and, digging
Mm.
through the closet of your anxieties and trying on one horrible, future after
Yeah.
another. You're just
Mhm.
in this moment. You're singing a song, or you're forming a mug out of
Right.
clay.
Yeah.
And I think that art is extremely, and you don't have to be good. You don't have
Right.
to be a good singer. You don't have to be a good painter. You just have to let yourself be involved in that moment of
Mhm.
letting even just exploring the color on the page, or the
Mm.
feel of the clay in your hands, or the sound of a chord being strummed.
Right.
Um, that it takes you out of your anxieties, and
And
and it's not that your anxiety, and it's not like you're ignoring your problems. They'll still be there when you get back. They're
mhm.
they're doing fine. You don't
Yeah.
need to worry that they're gonna feel neglected.
Yeah.
um, but it's like if you've got a headache and you take an aspirin, well, the aspirin doesn't cure the thing that caused your headache.
Mm.
It just gives you a respite so that
Right.
your body can recover.
Right.
And I think
Yeah.
art does the same thing. It gives you a respite so that your natural resilience can have a chance to act.
Yeah. And it helps you sort of like get into a certain flow state, right? And once you're sort
Yeah.
of in the zone, is what they
In
say.
the zone, full flow. Yeah, no, that's
Right.
really important.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, I
Uh,
wanted to ask though as well, like in terms of with like language, I feel like sometimes the English language lacks the ability to allow us to sort of express ourselves simply just because there's not enough words to help us to express certain emotions that people experience. I know that there's different languages that have words for emotions that we in the English language don't even have. It just doesn't exist. And so again, art can be a form of helping, tap into those emotions as well. Do you agree with that? Is that something that they talk about in arts field?
I don't know. English has more words than any other language in the world. I think it's because we've stolen so many words from so many other
Yeah.
languages. Um, I think regardless of the language, sometimes it's hard to identify an emotion and know, even if and a word exists. How do you label a feeling before it takes a while to of living with a feeling to have any kind of word. But I think art, in whatever form, it goes over language and allows you to express feelings that words in any language would be inadequate for. My husband couldn't hear me about my
Mm,
emotions until I sang them to him.
right. Yeah.
And and I wrote that song before my surgery. Um, and then, and I did other things, to I did other things to kind of prepare myself for it. I had a boob voyage party
Oh, that's so
a few days
cute.
before my surgery. I had this party. I had all my girlfriends over,
Yeah.
um, and since we danced and we drank and we sang, and I ate the cherry nipples off the boob cake without using my hands, um,
Love it. Yeah.
and uh, and then I got up on a chair and I took off all my clothes, and I gave my friends little cups of paint in all different colors, and they painted my body from head to toe
Oh my gosh, that's
with
amazing.
words and flowers and vines. I mean, just,
Mm.
and then one of my friends brought a box of sequins, and they pressed like
Yeah.
a million sequins into the wet paint. I have pictures.
Yeah. Send them over.
And I mean, it was really, really moving for
Mm.
them, for people that I was close to and that I loved to support me and physically touch me, and paint me at that moment.
Mm.
And it's a precious memory.
Yeah.
And, and four days later, on the night before my surgery, I was getting ready for bed, and I took off my pants, and a solitary sequin fluttered to the floor. I have no idea where that sequin was hiding for 4 days, but I kept it for years.
Yeah. That special little
So that
sequin.
was a really, and I've known other people who were facing the same thing as me, who did some other kinds of ways of marking that transition. And I
Mm.
think marking and celebrating transitions, whether they're um, good or bad ones, we have so many rituals around transitions, weddings and
Mm.
births and funerals. Um, we can create rituals around any transitions
Mm-hmm.
that we are going through, and I it's a precious memory, and it really helped me to celebrate the girls before they before
Right.
they
Yeah.
hit the trash bin.
I mean, it sounds like you took a really healthy sort of approach to coping with it in the sense of like using art and, having using the support around you to sort of like, help you through some of the hardest and most anxiety writing like times. Um, yeah.
I don't want to give you or your listeners the impression that I just sailed through this. There was plenty of times when I was, just sobbing into my pillow and cursing and just unable to cope with things. But I discovered that I seem to have a resilient frame of existing that you don't ever really know if you're going to be resilient if nothing ever happens.
True.
So,
Yeah.
and resilience is something that I think about a lot, and something that I've tried to help other people
Mm.
um, gain some perspective about, uh,
Yeah.
because, and well, through my own experience, after my surgeries, um, I wrote another song about the sort of the funny side of major surgery. It was called Tatas, and
That's fun.
um, and I shared them with a friend of mine who's been sort of a mentor in the in show business.
Yeah.
And she says, "Oh, Eva, you should write a show. You should write a show. You got these two great songs. You got this great experience. You got material,
Mm.
girl."
Yeah.
And I said, "No, no. I've been a sexy cabaret singer. I can't be a mastectomy girl." Um, but she sort of triggered something in my head, and so I just started making a few notes, and it just the floodgates opened, and like a week later I had the rough draft of this one woman show with 9 songs.
Wow.
um it's an hour-long show called The Mutant Diaries, Unzipping My Jeans. And
Wow.
I started performing it. Well, my first performance of that show was at my mother's bedside in hospice just a few days before she died. And it was not the best performance I've ever done of it, but it was certainly the most emotional. And
Mm.
my family was there, and my mother was beyond speech at that point, but I could tell that she was listening and understanding what I was saying. And she would
Mm.
like move her head a little bit and smile a
Yeah.
little bit. So I was glad that I did it, if for that, if nothing else.
Mm-hmm.
But then I was able to go on and perform the show I performed it for hospice nurses. I performed it for women's groups. I performed it in hospitals. I've performed it at conferences for
Mm.
oncology and genetics. I've performed it across the U.S. Twice in London. once as a fundraiser for the UK's biggest cancer research organization, Macmillan.
Oh, wow.
And then in my LA show, we videotaped it, so it's now on Amazon streaming. Um, and it was such a gift to be able to do this show and show people who, and many of whom were at the beginning of similar journeys or in the middle of similar journeys, and show them that there was an after that wasn't tragic.
Mm.
And it was,
Yeah.
of course, it's not. I was lucky. I mean, I've known plenty of women who haven't been as lucky as me and
Hmm.
who didn't catch it in time
Yeah.
and who have passed on. And but I guess I called myself a mutant, and but I also discovered my mutant superpower,
Hmm.
is that I got to change my future.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And so if I can pass that message on to other people, that that they can take action about their health, or they can take action about their lives, or that if they're going through something that feels overwhelming, it's a tsunami of things that they have no control over, that just possibly that there's there's sunshine on the other side. And my life has expanded and in ways that I never could have imagined before this
Hmm.
happened.
Yeah.
And I have no regrets.
Yeah. I mean, in your story, it's like you almost quite literally had to be pulled apart to look deep within, to be able to find a part of you that discover this sense of self that maybe wouldn't have quite happened in the same way. Like, what I mean is, this is going to be a question. When you started to make music, coming closer to the time of surgery, it was a lot of it was sort of based around the experiences that you were having, your personal experience. And to an extent, you started this whole show and it was all driven by that. It started becoming about you and your story. You actually allowed yourself to be the center of your story, of your art. Did that become your new form of like expression in art? Or did you sort of like, were you still doing the general performance of like being a performer, basically?
It changed things for me. I it in what I consider positive ways, although like I didn't go back to being a cabaret singer, um, but I started writing more, and even after the show, and I didn't want to make myself the center of all of my art, going forward. That was a thing I had to do at the time, and it
Yeah.
was a thing that turned out to be um, helpful to a lot of other people. So I was not sorry to do that.
Yeah.
But I've still dealt with these same issues in my writing since then. Um, I wrote a musical play called First You Jump, which is five stories of different people going. They're unrelated stories, but they're all around the theme of having to make a life-changing decision with
Hmm.
inadequate information, without knowing whether it's the right decision. And you have to
Mm.
jump and just hope that you'll grow wings before you crash on the rocks
Right.
below. Uh, and and so that was that also came out of that experience,
Mm.
because I had to decide to have all these major surgeries um,
Hmm.
without ever knowing for sure if they would have been necessary or if it was the right decision. I mean, for me, it was the right decision, but
Yeah.
I'll never know if I would have been able to get away without it.
Hmm.
And you just have to jump
Yeah.
and hope for the best. Um, so that's what all these stories in this play were about, and each story ends at the moment of decision before you know. before the character knows if they've made the right decision or not.
Right.
And so the audience is left to, think about, well, what would I have done? How did it come out? And that did pretty well. And then, and so I thought, okay, now I've dealt with it.
Yeah.
And then I started, one of the stories was, in that play was about Pinocchio. And it was called Geppetto's Funeral. And it was about Pinocchio at midlife as a human, looking back and regretting having become human and kind of wishing he'd stayed a puppet.
Mm-hmm.
And his character stuck with me. Here was a person who was made of wood and then suddenly changed into another form, a human. And then I started thinking, well, how did that work out for him? The story ends there. You always assume that it was happily ever after and it was just fine with being human. But I'm going, I had one body before and I have a different body after. And, even though I'm in a good place mentally at this point, there's a real disconnect between your inside and your outside. And how did it go for Pinocchio? Did he have this disconnect between, on the outside, he looks like a human now, but on the inside, did he still feel like that same wooden boy? And how did he integrate that his outward appearance with his? Did he feel, did he have imposter syndrome? Feel like I'm passing myself off as a human, but they don't know that I was really, I'm not like you. I was more closely related to that chair you're sitting in than I am to you. And his transformation was wished for. And mine wasn't, but I don't know that humans are necessarily that good at predicting what's going to make us happy in the future. I wouldn't have predicted that having a hysterectomy and a double mastectomy would make me happier than I was before. I couldn't have known that, but I am.
That's true.
And but there was, but it wasn't it wasn't easy to to come to grips with, well, am I still a woman, without all my girly parts? And what makes you a woman? And at the time I was one of my oldest friends was transitioning from male to female, and so we had lots of conversations about well, how do you know you're a woman? And I think I would know I was a woman if I was a head in a jar, had no body at all. But how do you know that? I mean, what makes you know that? So I ended up writing an entire novel about Pinocchio.
Tell us about it. What is it called? So I'll put it onto our description as well. But tell us about it.
Yes, please put the link to the book on Amazon. It's called Pinocchio's Guide to the End of the World. And it just came out in March.
Amazing.
And it's about Pinocchio's life as a human. After he became human, and he struggles with feeling like he's not really. He still, even though he's got a human body, he still doesn't feel like he's a real human because he didn't. He doesn't know anyone like himself. He was, a wooden that was transformed as opposed to the usual way of making humans. But it's not, it's also an adventure novel. I've said it in the years between the world wars in Europe during the time of rising fascism.
Interesting.
Which feels relevant in a lot of ways to the times that we're living in now. And his adventures and struggles to sort of find himself and reconcile his outsides with his insides. Take him all around the world and through incredible adventures. The book's a lot of fun. It's a roller coaster of adventure, but it also deals with how do you know when you're human? How do you know when you're real? How do you decide what's true? And how do you feel at home in your own skin?
Yeah.
So the book, deals with, coming to grips with who we are as humans.
Right.
And in some ways, it's sort of a rebuttal to the original book. I know most people haven't read the book. When they think of Pinocchio, they think of the Disney movie.
Yeah. The one with the nose.
Um, but the nose, the long nose in the book too, or in the original book. But the original book, written in the 1880s by Carlo Collodi, was more of a morality tale
Yeah.
about how children should be obedient. And in the movie versions, Pinocchio earns being real when he's brave and puts his own self-interest aside to save his father.
Interesting.
In the book, that's not when it happens. That adventure happens when he saves his father from the giant fish.
Right.
But then he goes to work on a farm turning a millstone for years to earn a glass of milk a day to bring to his father. And it's that when he's completely obedient to the authority and puts aside any personal interest and self-fulfillment to serve the status quo. That's when he becomes human. And I wanted to say, no, we're human because we're flawed and we're creative and we have dreams and desires and we need to live in the world and help others but we also help the world by being the most complete versions of ourselves that we can be.
No, I think that's true as well. Like, I think that maybe it made sense and it was relevant at the time that it was, being written that, following authority is like generally the way it should be. That's kind of what the general population was taught at that time in school. And, even as adults, like serving in the military, you don't do it because you have any personal, reasons or agenda. You do it just to serve your country, to serve your leader, right? And that narrative has changed over the years. And, we teach kids nowadays to be creative, to be different, to be who they are and who they identify with. It's almost like if a kid at the age of like 8 years old tells you that, they don't identify that in the gender or the sex that they were born, like we have to respect that and, allow them to find that within themselves. And that also the other point, which is like, change. I mean, this is the way that I see it, that change is inevitable, right? I think that the mere fact that we as human beings age, right, through the aging process, our bodies are going through constant change. And it's like our minds are always having to catch up to that, whether it is something that we physically have to do to our body or not. It's the change is going to happen regardless, right? But I agree. So there's a lot of people I know that would say like mentally they still identify with this 20-year-old kid that they were 30 years ago, and they're just like, no, I know I look this way. I know I don't fit in this bar or in this club. Like I know I stand out like a sore thumb, but my mind and my heart is, I'm totally here. Like this is where I belong, but it's hard. It's really, really hard to sort of like come to grips with, the changes that happen around us. And yeah, what would you tell, for example, a listener about how one can sort of like catch up with those changes or come to terms with those changes? Do you think that identity is one way, and then we have to always try to like work towards that, or we have to sort of like learn to change with our physical changes and state?
It's an interesting question. Obviously, as you say, our bodies change constantly over our lives. I'm not the same person I was when I was 2 or
Right.
12 or
Yeah.
25. But those changes happen gradually. I think, we don't really think about them because I was basically the same person as I was when I was 2 and then when I was 2 and a week.
Yeah.
So great changes that happen gradually. I think, we gradually adjust our perceptions around them. For my surgical changes and for Pinocchio,
It was
and for
overnight.
people who are dealing with traumatic situations, say they've been in an accident or they've been diagnosed with a devastating disease, your identity changes all at once. And that's much harder to deal with, these sudden changes. And I think, okay, well, here's an analogy that I really like. Say you're walking down the hall and you've got a cup of coffee in your hand, and someone jostles you. They're walking the other way and they jostle you and you spill. If I asked you, why did you spill your coffee? What would you say?
It was an accident. Someone hit me.
Okay. Well, think about it this way. Perhaps you spilled coffee because that was what was in your cup. If you'd had tea, you would have spilled tea. And I think that we can be mindful about how we fill our cups, because life is going to jostle you. It's just inevitable. Something, no matter how idyllic your life is, something's going to bump your arm and spill your cup. And what comes out in that moment is what you have filled your cup with. So, there are ways that people can be mindful about little things that will prepare you for big things, because big things are coming for everyone. So, if a small frustration happens, do you lose it, or do you laugh it off? Do you distract yourself somehow? Do you turn it into a song or a joke or a picture? How do you fill your cup on a day-to-day basis with the small things? That's what's going to be there for you when the big things come along.
Yeah. It's almost like training that muscle in your mind to sort of choose to see the world a certain way, to be able to handle the situations that are inevitably about to hit you, right?
Yeah, I talked about this with my sister. Her husband comes from a family with a strong history of Alzheimer's. And his mother, she responded to every small frustration in her life with anger and bitterness and frustration. But she was a lovely person. I mean, she would get over it. I remember her quite well. But as the Alzheimer's took over her brain, eventually all that was left was those immediate responses to frustrations. All that was left was bitterness and anger and unhappiness. And it was a very sad and difficult end for her and for everyone around her. So my sister and her husband have made a conscious decision that to laugh off small frustrations, to accept help, when with graciousness when they need help. You forget a word, it's laugh it off. They're filling their cups with the kind of future they want to have.
Right.
And it sounds kind of grim, but in the moment it's not. I mean, my cat's shown up here. Hello. She wants breakfast. It's her breakfast time. Here, I'll this is samosa.
She's so cute. Samosa. I love it. Looks like one.
Yeah, well, she was about as big as one when we got her.
Oh. Yeah, no.
It doesn't have to, it's not a conscious, every day thinking of, oh, well, I better put something nice in my cup so that,
Right.
When tragedy arises, it's not constantly thinking about the tragedy, but it's trying to change a mindset, a reflexive action, a reflexive response, trying to train myself to, and my sister and her husband training themselves to, be more calm about little frustrations. And it not only prepares them for the future, but it also makes their day-to-day life better.
Easier to get through. And
Easier to
definitely.
get through.
I can't help. I still want to ask though. Like I want to ask the same question that I asked earlier, which is for someone who's generally more inclined to think pessimistically about things, who would look at the glass half empty or would look at a situation that's, dubious and think more on the negative side. Surely there's something someone can do more intentionally. Like as we talked about before, like was it ever for you, was it ever an intentional thing that you had to do on a day-to-day basis, or was it something that just kind of flowed? Could it potentially be like an innate thing, or was it to do with your upbringing, like the household that you were raised in? Like how can we turn that for a person who maybe is a bit more pessimistic listening to this?
Well, all of that, I think the research on resilience shows that if someone has had at least one person in their upbringing who believed in them when they were children, that they will have a greater level of resilience as adults than people who grew up in situations where they didn't have a champion. They didn't have someone who believed in them and encouraged them in their youth.
Yeah.
I had an abundance of people who were around me who were pulling for me my whole life, and that was a blessing that I can't express my thankfulness for enough. I was very, very lucky. But so what do people do if they haven't had that, or if they're not, if they're naturally pessimistic? Therapy. I mean, I think it's important to talk to someone and not try to deal with it all by yourself. If someone could be encouraged to just reach out and find someone to talk to, find a friend or a therapist or a support group. Support groups are great, and there's an abundance of them now. When I first got my learned that I had the mutation, there was really only one source for support that I found. There was a website called there's a group called FORCE, Facing Our Risk Empowered, for women with genetic cancer predispositions like me, and they had a forum. And so I could connect with other women who were going through the same thing as me.
Right.
At the time. Now, in addition to that, there are dozens of groups on Facebook that are support groups for people. There's the BRCA support groups. And I encourage everyone to reach out to other people who are on the same path, whatever they're going through, whether it's cancer or addiction or, whatever their challenge is, grief. Yeah. Reach out. There's other people. You're not alone. There's other people going through the same thing that you're going through. And maybe their story isn't exactly like yours, but it's close enough that there are things that you can share and support each other. We did this one thing on the forum in the FORCE group. I was, after I had my hysterectomy, and I was recovering from the surgery, I started writing limericks, these silly little poems. That I wrote a limerick about my cat trying to walk on my stomach when I was after abdominal surgery. And I just posted on the group, here's a limerick, and I was afraid people were going to say, oh, you're making light of something serious. But it touched a nerve. And, before that thread was done, people had written over 300 limericks and short poems and funny stuff about, the cancer and spouses and surgeries and losing body parts and losing friends, and it became this incredible I
love that
outpouring of fun and humor around something that it's going to happen whether you laugh or you cry.
Yeah, true.
So you might as well find something to laugh about.
Yeah, and just make light of the situation. That there could have been someone on the other end of, that computer screen, like shedding a tear and reading that and going, okay, let out a little giggle. And, you've turned their entire day around with that and narrative potentially as well, right? So that's great.
So, reaching out through a support group is not just about getting support. If you give support, that helps you too.
True.
You know, if you say something and it connects with another person, they go, "Oh yeah, that's true. I hear you," and that helped me. How does that make you feel?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you feel like, life isn't quite so hopeless. You helped someone.
Yeah, that's true. There's like a newfound sense of purpose in that too, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I love that. Eva, thank you so much for being on Multispective
Sure.
and sharing your story. I'll be putting links down in the description for you if you'd like to read the book or reach out to Eva as well at some point.
Yeah.
So do check that out. And yeah, thank you for today.
Thank you for having me on the show. It was really fun to talk to you.
If you enjoyed the episode and would like to help support the show, please follow and subscribe. You can rate and review your feedback on any of our platforms listed in the description. I'd like to recognize our guests who are vulnerable and open to share their life experiences with us. Thank you for showing us we're human. Also, a thank you to our team who worked so hard behind the scenes to make it happen.
Chris Trzynski, Stefan Menzel.
The show would be nothing without you. I'm Jenica, host and writer of the show, and you're listening to Multispective.